Alright guys, in this video we're going to talk about backgrounds and borders, and I'm going to use the full screen editor and full screen browser because I want to utilize all the space here. Now notice that I have a folder called IMG. This is an image folder, and I have two images. One is a stars.jpg file, which is this image here. I'm going to use as a background, and then I have a leaf.png, which you can't really see because it's transparent and it's on a dark background. Now, one thing to remember is JPEG files or JPEG images, they can't be transparent, okay, like this one is. PNG files can have a transparent background where you can put it on any web page, like let's say the web page is a red background and it will show red behind this image. If it were a JPEG, it would have to have a solid color. It couldn't be transparent. So just remember that. If you want transparency, then use a PNG image. Alright, so what we're going to do now is create a file called 05_backgrounds_borders.html. And let's put in our boilerplate here. And for a title, we'll say backgrounds and borders. Let's add in our style tags. And as far as the HTML goes, we're going to have 4 divs. So the first one is going to have an ID of box-1. Okay, so you want a div with the ID of box1. We're going to put in H3 and just say box1 for the title. And we want a paragraph with, let's say, 20 words. So we'll do lorem 20. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is just highlight this whole div, and I'm going to copy it down with Shift Option or Shift Alt on Windows, and then we're going to hit the down key 3 times. So now we have 4 divs, and then we're just going to change the ID. So 1, 2, and 3, and 4. And then we'll change the text as well. And we'll probably use this HTML in a couple different lectures. That's 3 and 4. Okay, so let's save this and let's open it up with Live Server. And it should look like this. Okay, so we have our 4 divs. And we're going to style the first one. So let's go back and let's target the ID of box1, and we're going to use the background. Oops, if I spell background right. We want to use the background color property. Now, when you want to assign a color to text, obviously we use the color property. We've already talked about that. If you want to style the background or color the background, you use background color. And I'm just going to choose this Blanche Almond. Doesn't really matter what color we use. But if I go ahead and save this and we take a look, notice that this whole div now has that background color. Okay, and it's going to take up however much space that the element takes up, or the div. And remember, divs are block level, so this is going to go all the way across by default. Okay, unless we set a width on it or something like that. And I know the text is right up against the edge. That's because there's no padding. I'm going to go over margin and padding in a lecture very soon. So let's head back into our editor here, and I want to go over border. Okay, now border has 3 mandatory properties. So the first one is going to be width, and this can be in any order, but we're going to do width first. So let's say 3 pixels. Now if I just do that and take a look, we have nothing. There's no change because we need all 3 properties. The next one is going to be the color. So we want to say border dash color, and let's just do red. And then the last one is going to be border style, which can be dashed, dotted, double, groove. The most popular is going to be solid. That's probably the most common that you'll use, which is just a solid regular border. So let's save that and let's take a look. And now we have a 3 pixel wide red solid border. Okay, and just to give you an idea of some of the other styles, we can do like dotted. If we take a look at that, that's the dotted border. And what else? We have dashed. That's dashed. It's similar to dotted, but they're wider lines. But for the most part, you're probably going to be using solid the most. Now, using all 3 properties like this, we don't have to do it this way, and this isn't the preferred way. What we can do is just use the single border property, and we can actually add all 3 of those in here. So 3 pixels, solid red, and it doesn't matter the order either. You can use any order. And if I comment this out, I'll highlight this and do control / or control ? That'll comment that out. If I save with Control S and take a look, we have the same thing. Okay, so this is the exact same as doing this. It's just less lines of code. Okay, so that's border. Let's say we want to do just a border on the top. Actually, you know what? We'll grab the next one. Let's do box 2. And let's actually give this a background. Now we can also use just background if we want to add a color or a background image, which I'll get into in a second. But let's give this a dark background, and let's give it a color, a text color of white. Oops. And let's say we just want a border on the top. We can just do border dash top, and let's say we want to do blue solid 3 pixels. Okay, so if we save that and we take a look, now we just have a border on the top. So you can do border top, border bottom, border left, and border right. All right, so now I want to take a look at the border radius property, because by default our corners are just straight corners, but we can round it off if we want. So I'm actually going to comment out the border top, or no, I'll leave it. But what I do want to do, is just add a line break between these two, box 1 and box 2. There we go. So let's say that this top one here, I want rounded corners. So for that, I would use a border radius. So I'm going to go to box 1, and I'm going to say border radius. And we can put percentages here. We can put pixels. Let's say 10 pixels. That's pretty common. And if we take a look, now we have rounded corners. Now before CSS3, there was no border radius property. We actually had to create little images of corners, rounded corners, and then position them perfectly so that it looked rounded like that, which was a huge pain in the butt. And if you're just learning HTML and CSS now, you missed a lot of crappy stuff that we used to have to do before HTML5 and CSS3. Just to let you know that. Now, if we wanted to just add rounded corners to, like, let's say the top, we can do that as well. So let's take box 2 and let's say border dash top dash left dash radius. I know that's a long property. And let's say 10 pixels. So if we take a look at that, notice that only the top left is rounded. Okay, so we can choose which corners we want to round. And let's say we just want the whole top, so we'll just copy this down and we'll do right as well. All right, so now if we look at that, both of the top is rounded. Now you don't even have to have a border property to use border radius. Like, we could still round the bottom edges even though there's no border. Okay, so that doesn't matter. So next thing I want to look at is the background image property. Okay, a lot of times you might want to have some kind of image as your background. So let's use box 3, and let's use the background dash image property. So this is going to actually take in URL, and in here we could use a remote image, like we could do HTTP and then locate some image on the internet and use that. But what we want to do is target the stars.jpg file that's in our image folder. Okay, and since our image folder is local in our directory here, we can just do /. That represents the current directory. Then we want to go into the image directory, and then we want to call the stars.jpg file. Okay, so let's save that, and let's go back, and notice that it uses the background image. Now you don't see the whole image because it only takes up the space of the actual element. Okay, and this is the whole div right here. Now we can make this bigger by setting a height. We can set a height and a width in CSS. Let's also change the color of the text because it's unreadable right now. So we'll say color white, and let's give it a height of, let's say, 300 pixels, and let's give it a width of 600 pixels. And let's save that and take a look, and there we go. So now we have our background image. We have a width of 300 and a height of, width of 600 and a height of 300. So with background image, or I should say with background, you have a bunch of other properties, just like with border. One of those is background repeat. Now you can't see it here, but let's say this image was only like this big. okay, it ended right here, it would repeat both this way on the x-axis and this way on the y-axis. And usually you're not going to want that unless it's some kind of seamless texture that you want to repeat, like as some kind of seamless background. But for the most part, you're not going to want that. So let's go ahead and set the background dash repeat property. And there's a few options here. You can do repeat, which is the default. It repeats both ways. Repeat X will only repeat on the x-axis, which is horizontal. Repeat Y will go on the up and down, the y-axis. But what we want is no repeat, because we don't want it to repeat. Okay. Another property is the position property. So let's say background position. And this will move the image around. It takes in two values. The first is going to be the x-axis, and the second is the y-axis. So let's do 100 pixels. Let's just do 100 pixels 0 and see what happens here. So what happened is on the x-axis, it pushed it over 100 pixels, and it actually leaves a blank space here. Now, if I do 100 pixels on the y-axis, try to guess what's going to happen. So let's save that and take a look. And it pushes it down 100 pixels. Now, let's say you wanted to move it up and over 100 pixels so that the image didn't actually get pushed out of its context here, or its wrapper. So let's go back, and what we can do is we can do negative values. So now if we take a look, what happened is the image went up 100 pixels and over this way 100 pixels. Now you also have keywords you can use like top, center, and bottom. So let's say we wanted to center and center on both axes. Okay, and you can see what it did is it just centered it. If I wanted to take the y-axis and move it up to the top, we could do that as well. And this might not be the best image to use as an example because it's just stars. It's not something that you can actually tell what position it's in. But just know that we can move it, top, bottom, center, and so on. Now, in most cases, you're going to want the whole image to cover the background, and that's not what's going on here. It's the size of the image, which I believe is 1920 by 1080, so the image is really like this big. It's like the whole window. Now let's say we just want the whole image to show in this spot. What we could do is we could add a background size property, and we can set that to cover. Okay, so it's going to cover the whole space. So if we take a look now, the whole image is showing. It doesn't matter what size the image is. It's going to take up the whole space right here. All right, so that's a lot of different properties, right, for the background. There's even more than that, but let's say that we want to do exactly what we're doing here, but we don't want to take up all these lines with all these different properties. We can actually just use background. Okay, so I'm going to use background. I'm going to do the same exact thing we just did. So we're going to take the URL, and then after that we want the no repeat, and then after that we'll do the position. Let's do center. Let's just do center, center, and then when you want to put the size in, you just do a slash and then cover like that. So if I go ahead and comment this out and save and take a look, we get the same result with much less lines of code, much less properties. Okay, so let's move on. I want to look at having a fixed background, and I'll show you what I mean. So let's add in our box 4, and this time I'm going to set background. Now when you want to set an image, you don't have to use background image. You can use just background, even if you don't want to add all this other stuff we did up here. So let's do URL. And let's go in the current folder and then into the image folder, and we want leaf.png. Okay, and I'm just going to do a no repeat. All right. Now let's save this and see what we get. So notice that it's just because the image is bigger, like the image is this big, it's not going to show the whole image. It's only going to cover whatever the content area covers, which is this right here. So let's see. What I'm going to do is set. Actually, you know what we'll do is we'll add more content. So in box 4, let's take this paragraph and let's just copy it down like a bunch of times. a lot. And save that, and now take a look, and now notice that it shows the whole image because the content area is bigger. If we manually set a height like we did here, we'd be able to see the whole image as well. But I want to show you how we can make this a fixed image. And to give you an example, let me just make this smaller so we have more of a scroll. Now if I scroll, see how the image just kind of stays in place? We can make it fixed. So let's go back up to box 4, and let's actually position it differently too. So let's do center bottom. Let's see what that looks like. So now see how it's center bottom. Let's do center. Okay, so now it's dead center. Now I want it to stay fixed, so I'm going to add a background attached. Background attachment property. And let's say fixed. And let's save that. And now watch when I scroll. The image just stays in place, and it's fixed to the browser window. Okay, so if you want to do that, then you want to use the background attachment fixed. Alright, so that's going to be it for this video, guys. In the next one, we're going to start to talk about the box model, which has to do with margin and padding and just how spacing works in CSS. Alright, so in this video we're going to talk about the box model, and we're going to talk about margin and padding, as well as what a CSS reset is. Okay, we're also going to look at some of the default styling of the browser. So let's create a new file here called 06_box_model.html. And let's put in our head body tags, and for the title we'll say box model, margin and padding. And let's put in our style. And then for the HTML, I'm going to put in a div with the class of box, which is just going to have an H3, we'll say box1, and then a paragraph with 20 words, so lorem 20. Alright, and then I'm just going to copy this down, so Shift Option or Shift Alt, and then down, we'll copy it. And let's just we'll just change this to box2, and they both have the same class, okay, which is absolutely fine. We're just going to style them the same way. So let's save this and open it with Live Server. Open it in Chrome, and I want to open up our dev tools. So on Mac it's Command Option I, on Windows it's F12, or you can use your menu. So remember, this is the HTML over here, this is the CSS. So I'm actually going to just click on the div right here, the first div, which will give us the CSS, which by default just has a display block, because remember, divs by default are displayed as a block, meaning they go all the way across. And right here you're going to see a diagram of the box model, which makes it a lot easier to explain. So there's basically 4 layers. There's the element itself, which we can put a height and a width property on. By default, the width is all the way across, and the height is going to be however much content is in it. If I add a bunch more paragraphs, it's going to extend more. Or I can just set a height in CSS. Then we have padding, so we have spacing we can put here. Then we have the border. Okay, we looked at the border properties in the last video. And then we have the margin. Now, the margin and padding, the spacing, is, some people get this confused when they first start, but all you really have to remember is the margin is the outside of the element or the outside of the border. The padding is the inside. Okay, so to give you an example, let me just add some styling for the box. Okay, so we're going to say box, and we're going to say background. We're going to give it a color of light gray. Okay, and then we'll give it a border. Let's say 2 pixels, gray, solid. And we went over this stuff in the last video. So now you can get a better picture of the box model. So we have the content, then we have the padding, and then we have the border, and then outside of the border is the margin. Now, notice that there's some spacing here, there's spacing here, there's spacing here. And there's even spacing around the sides. That's because the browser has default margin and padding on certain elements. So if we grab the selector tool here and I hover over the H3, you'll see that there's some orange areas here where the space is. That's the margin. And if I go over the paragraph, we have some margin, and even the body, if I go right, actually it's not going to let me show it, but anyways, the body has some margin as well. So let's click on this, the H3, and then over here you'll see the styling. So this margin block start, margin block end is basically margin top and bottom, and it has a value of 1 and M is a relative unit. It's relative to the number of pixels of the font size of its element, of its parent container. And if you don't understand what that means, don't worry about it. If you want to see the computed pixels, you can actually click on computed, and it'll show you that the font size and the margin on the top and bottom for the H3 is going to be, it's 1872 pixels by default. If we click on the paragraph, you'll see that it has a margin on the top and bottom of 16 pixels. If I click on the body, you can see it has a margin on all sides of 8 pixels. And there you can see the orange around the whole body. Okay, so these are all default browser styles. And there's other elements as well, like a UL, an unordered list, and an ordered list. They both have margin on the top and bottom, and they have a padding on the left of, I believe, 40 pixels. So this is just stuff that you're going to run into, and you can overwrite those values, obviously. Like I could set, for paragraph, I could set margin to 0 and get rid of that. And I can actually show you that real quick. So if I say box paragraph and set margin to 0 and save that, we go back. Now you'll see that there's no orange when I hover over the paragraph. And if we look at the styles, you can still see the default, but this overwrites it, what I just did. Okay, now if you want to take away all the default styling, you can do that with what's called a reset. So I'm going to get rid of that, what I just did, and I'm going to create a CSS reset. Okay, and there's different ways to reset. You can reset margin and padding, font size, borders. There's actually like popular reset files that you can use, like Eric Myers has a reset file that's pretty popular, but the easiest way to do it is just to use an asterisk, which selects everything, and then just say you want margin to be 0 and padding to be 0. Okay, so we're just setting the margin and padding to 0 for everything. So let's save that, and this is on all sides. Okay, top, bottom, left, and right. So if we go back now, notice there's no spacing anywhere, not even on the body, not even on the side here. And if I grab the selector tool, there's no orange, there's no green, which is padding. There's just no spacing at all. Now, it's up to you on if you want to use a reset or not. I do sometimes. It really depends on the layout. But if you do use it, you have to remember to add all of your own margin and padding, because now if I add another paragraph under this one, it's going to be right next to it. It's not going to have that default spacing that the browser gives it. Same with the heading. Usually you'll want some space here. It's not there anymore. We will have to create it if we're going to keep the reset. All right, so I just wanted to kind of explain how the default margin and padding works, also the structure of the box model. So now let's look at some properties that have to do with margin and padding. So I'm going to add a width to the box as well. Let's do width 500 pixels. And let's say I want padding on all sides. So I'm going to put a comment right here, and I'm going to say padding on all sides. So we would just use padding, and then we could do, let's say, 20 pixels. So this will put 20 pixels on all sides. You can see top, and notice the green. If I use the element selector and we hover over it, we see the green. That's actually the padding. Okay, and you can see that it's 20 pixels on all sides for both, obviously, because they both have the class of box, which is what we styled. Now, when we add padding, if we keep the box sizing the way it is now, the box sizing property, it adds to the width of the entire thing. All right, and to just give you an example, if I say padding 120 and we take a look, the width of this is it's not 500 pixels. It added to that. It's 500 pixels plus the padding, and that's not usually how you want to do it. Usually you want to keep the width at the right width and then just add the padding. So to do that, you want to add to the asterisk right here a box sizing property. Okay, and you want to set that to border box. So now if I save that and we go back, we still have 120 pixels padding, but the box is still 500 pixels. It just pushes it inside, okay, as opposed to adding it. So let's put that back to 20. I just made it that big so you could tell that the width was larger. So we'll put that back. And the next thing I want to do is show you margin, because right now there's no margin and these are kind of stuck together. So margin is going to be spacing around the border, on the outside of the border. So let's add, let's say margin on all sides, and we'll say margin 20 pixels. And if we take a look and we use our element selector, see the orange, that's the margin. The green is the padding, the orange is the margin. In fact, if I click on one of the divs and we look at the box model, it'll show us all the values. 20, the border is 2 pixels, the padding is 20, and then the width here. Okay, so just remember that, margin outside, padding inside. And it doesn't matter if you have a border property set or not, it's still going to be relative to the box model. All right, now these properties that we've used, padding and margin with just one value, it's putting the same on all sides, but there may be cases where you want different values on different sides. So I'm going to go down here and let's say padding per side. Okay, so we can use padding top. So let's say on the top we want 10 pixels. And let's do padding bottom. Actually, I'm going to do top, let's do right, and I'm doing this in a certain order for a reason, and I'll show you that in a minute. So padding right, let's say we want 20 pixels. Let's do padding bottom, we'll do 10 just like the top, and then left, we'll do 20 just like the right. Okay, now this is going to overwrite this, and that's something that I really haven't talked about yet. When you have the same properties, the ones that are further down are going to overwrite the ones that are further up. Okay, so all this padding here is going to overwrite this one. So even if I leave them without commenting this out, this is going to take effect. So let's take a look, and you can see now there's less padding. If you look at the green, there's 10 pixels on the top and bottom, there's 20 on the left and right. So if you want to do this, but you don't want to have 4 different properties, you can shorten this, just like with most cases, like you saw with the border and the background. There's shorthands. So let's say padding shorthand. Now, when we do this, there's a certain order to the values. So it's going to be this, just like I did right above, top, right, bottom, left. That's why I did it in this order. So if we say padding, it's going to be in that order. So let's do top 10 pixels, right 20 pixels, bottom 10 pixels, left 20 pixels. So if I save that and we take a look, it's going to be the same thing. So this is just a shorthand for this. It does the exact same thing. Now we can make this even shorter because the top and bottom and the left and right are the same. Top and bottom are 10, left and right are 20. So let's say padding shorthand. So we can actually just have 2 values. One will be top, bottom. One will be left, right. So we'll say padding. Top and bottom we want 10, left and right we want 20. Okay, so this is the same exact thing as this, which is the same exact thing as this. So we're just shortening it up. Okay, so if we look at it, we get the same exact thing. We have the 10 on the top and bottom, 20 on the left and right. So hopefully that makes sense. You can add padding all these different ways. Now with margin, it's the same exact thing. Okay, same exact thing. I'm actually going to just copy all this and change it to margin. So margin top, right, left, bottom. This same thing, same order. So let's grab this and let's put this down here and just change this to margin. Change these to margin. Margin. Okay, so that's going to do the same exact thing. Let's save that. If we take a look, now we have 10 pixels top and bottom margin, 20 left and right margin. Okay, so yeah, I think that's all I want to do here. One other thing, usually since we did a reset, we'd probably want to separate the H3 and the paragraph a little bit. So what I would do is just add box H3, and I'd probably add like padding bottom 10 pixels, 5 pixels, whatever it may be. Whoops, what happened here? Oh, I'm inside. I'm inside this style. Okay, so let's check that out, and now we have spacing under the heading. All right, so that's it, guys. In the next video, we're going to start to talk about floats. Okay, so we can align things. Now, ultimately, when you align stuff, you're usually going to want to use Flexbox or the CSS grid, but we're not going to talk about that stuff just yet because that stuff is a little more complicated and it's much newer. I want you to get a handle on just old-fashioned floating before you start to deal with flex and grid and stuff like that. All right, so I'll see you in the next video.